Shadows on Media. This is Coming Out Stories. It's a podcast about one of the most important conversations of your life. I'm Emma Goswell. You're going to hear from Ed Salvato now. He's the editor-in-chief of Man About World Gay Travel magazine. Although he grew up in Boston, I interviewed him in a coffee shop in New York City, just in case you're wondering what the background noise was.
Well, I think, like a lot of people, I probably questioned it when I was quite young. You know, I remember at age 5 and 6 thinking, oh, I'm a little different from other people. I like dolls. I like things that my other boys don't seem to like. So I kind of started questioning things early on.
Did you worry about it at that age, or did you just sort of go with it, with the doll playing?
I did actually worry about it. I thought about it. And I think you have to think about, at age 5 or 6, someone having to consider such a ponderous, weighty, existential question. What does it do to your neurons, right? I mean, I think it kind of helps, and it probably helps and hurts. You know, I think it hurts gay people in some ways that can make them neurotic, but I think it helps gay people in the sense that you're firing synapses that you probably normally wouldn't use for 10, 20 more years, you know, really. So gay people are having to think, okay, do I hide this? Imagine at age 5 or 6 thinking, I think I have to hide this from the people I know, the only people I know in my life, my parents. Like, so you start thinking about gays and their ability to blend in, act, you know, be creative around how they present themselves. I just think, I mean, it's a long answer to your question, but yeah, I did think about it quite a bit when I was younger. And I kind of knew that it was, quote, wrong, or it wouldn't be accepted.
So did you modify your behaviour then? Did you try and not play with dolls?
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment I remember when I felt free and I was just doing whatever I wanted. And whether it was playing with dolls or hanging out with, you know, girls or whatever, but then I realized that people look askance at that, so I had to modify my behavior. So yeah, very early on, I joined every sport imaginable that my parents wanted me to join: basketball, baseball, football, and I happened to be good at a lot of them, unfortunately. So I was sort of
why unfortunately?
Well, unfortunately, because I was kind of stuck in there. Every time I wanted to quit, you know, the coach would call, or you know, that kind of thing. So it was kind of annoying in that sense. But yeah, I kind of tried to blend in as much as I could. The other problem, or maybe curse and blessing, that I had was I was always ahead of all my other peers in school in my grades. So I have 5 brothers and sisters, all of whom have multiple degrees, written books, all this kind of stuff. It's a very smart group of people, but in that group, I excelled beyond a lot of people. So people, they weren't necessarily criticizing me for being effeminate or gay, but it was a little bit of like, oh, you know, you got an A, you got 100, you're so smart, teacher's pet, everyone likes, you know. So I think I suffered more because of the perceived intellectual superiority.
So you were already being bullied, basically?
Yeah, never bullied. I was actually never bullied, knock on wood. I had muscle in my family, and like I have 3 straight brothers and 2 sisters, and everyone, there was never any bullying of any one of us, really. We all went to a tiny little small Catholic school, so I had the same 25 fellow students, more or less, for 8 years. So in that environment, people aren't allowed to bully or be bullied. It just doesn't happen. The nuns were very strict. So luckily I've avoided all that.
Okay, but this is in Boston, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine that's quite a fairly progressive city, yeah?
Yes and no. I mean, at the time, especially, you know, I'm 50 now, so that was quite a while ago. And Boston has had deserved reputation for being super racist, especially the Irish against everyone else. And there was a cover of Time magazine where it was like, there was like this terrible busing incident where blacks were being bused into white neighborhoods, and there was a huge revolt by white people against black people. It's pretty ugly. So Boston has a really strong history of ugly racism and homophobia. But alongside that, there's the intellectual aspect, the educational systems, the progressive, you know, women who were early supporters of suffrage, or, you know, the Boston, you know, the revolution took place in part in Boston. So there's always those strains. And when you think about gay marriage, the first place gay marriage was sort of legally permitted, was Massachusetts, right? And you think, oh, that's so progressive. Not really. It's actually kind of conservative. Marriage is a conservative institution. So in a weird way, Massachusetts is progressive and conservative at the same time. It's hard to describe. So gay people would, you know, walk around with like, oh yes, my partner and I, we live in the South End, and we have a place in Provincetown, and we have a car, and we have a dog, and this is the perfect life. So it was almost as oppressive as heterosexuality. But in reality, a lot of times those perfect relationships weren't so perfect. So there's this attitude that you have to appear to others how you want to be perceived. that doesn't happen in New York and San Francisco and other places. So Boston is unique in that sense.
Okay. So what was your personal coming out like then? So there must have been a time when you thought, I can't hide this any longer, I'm going to tell people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we were saying earlier, having 5 brothers and sisters and 2 parents and living abroad and doing all this stuff, I've had a long series of coming out, and I think you just keep coming out through your whole life, and you're sitting in an airplane and the guy next to you is like, what do you do? It's like, I'm the editor-in-chief of a gay travel magazine. You've just come out. It's like, I just roll my eyes and I have the word gay on my business card. It's like, oh my God, can I not escape this? But first time was in college. I went to Harvard College, and it was a very supportive environment, even though in the 80s it wasn't that supportive outside. I was in a bubble, and I don't think I realized that. And I came out to my friends, and a lot of people were coming out at that point in the 80s. And so it was very quickly accepted. And I came out to my sister, and she's like, you're the second person who came out to me this week. Her best friend came out to her that same week. And so he and I ended up dating, and she was so pissed off. But so I got a lot of weird, it was completely fine. But then after I left college, I moved to France, and it wasn't that accepted there. My partner, his grandmother really hated me because she thought I corrupted her son because she was old-fashioned. And my parents, I didn't come out until much later. My brothers and sisters, I waited until they were a certain age and maturity level, and I came out one after the next. 5, it took 10 years to come out to my 5 siblings.
They didn't communicate with each other then?
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they all did. But my direct coming out to them, I thought that was important to do for each one of them. So I tried to do that. And then, my first job, one of the bosses was gay, so that was kind of easy for me to come out. But the first one was in college when I I remember being in the shower and just thinking, I've tried to date girls, it just is not working. I had a girlfriend at the time at Yale. Well, she was at Yale, and she turned out to be a lesbian.
Power couple. she turned out to be a lesbian.
Well, I called her the gay man generator because she 3 guys she dated all turned gay. I was like, boy, honey, you're cranking them out. Ellen, it was very funny. But it was convenient for me to have a girlfriend in a different city, right? I mean, obviously. So I just thought, it was very intellectual the way I did it. It was like, oh, I'm gay, and then it was like a switch was flicked. I flicked a switch, and that's it, I'm gay, and that's kind of how I deal with things. That's how it happened. So
what was this revelatory moment in the shower?
It's like, what were you doing in the shower, Ed? I just was contemplating my life and why I was happy and doing really well at Harvard, had a lot of great friends, but fundamentally unhappy. Well, why? Well, there was a disconnect between the person I was and then the person that I was to everyone else and the person I was inside. And no one knew that person inside, I thought. And I thought, well, I want to bridge those differences. And I want my friends who are so amazing, so supportive, to also know this part about me. And it was made maybe a little bit easier because I had 2 friends who were just super forward, out, ballsy gay guys, just unapologetically gay. And I like that unapologetic aspect of it. I always thought you kind of had to apologize for being gay, but they kind of taught me, no, you don't. And this one, William, from Iowa, but a small town in Iowa, population 5,000, a rural community, but his parents are super progressive. So he came out when he was 12 to them in Iowa, and they supported him. And when he was my friend in college, I thought, if he can do it, I can do it in Boston, at Harvard, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for God's sake. So he was one of my role models. And in the 80s, to be gay and young in Boston was a blast. The club scene was super fun. There were mixed men and women, queer, whatever. It was a really fun time to be gay. So I kind of got a lot of the fun. And then, of course, AIDS kind of blew up everything. But it was a good moment for a while there. So I felt supported, and I felt like I could come out to a very positive reception, and indeed that was true.
And then what about when you did actually confront your parents?
That was a different matter. So I was living in France, in Paris, with my then partner for 5 years, Jérôme, a French guy, and people came to visit me. My sister came back and said to my parents, "Oh, Ed's living with this guy. I think he's gay." So they kind of outed me. So I wrote them a letter. It was before email, so I wrote them a letter. Then when I came back to visit at Christmas, they confronted me. And my father was funny, super supportive in a way. He's Italian, old school, but he goes "My boss is gay. He goes, I think gay people shouldn't be bullied. I don't, they shouldn't be discriminated against. I think it's terrible when I hear about physical assaults against gay people. I just don't want it in the family." So it was a little bit of the old-fashioned Italian thing. And my mother was just the first word in AIDS is acquired. You can get AIDS from anyone. So she was more concerned for my health. And so I said, I was overly intellectual with them, and I didn't allow them really time to kind of catch up. But I basically had my responses prepared for both of them. But that was how it came out. 30 years later, or whatever it is, they are the most unbelievably supportive you can possibly imagine.
What was it like sitting down writing that letter, though?
It was hard. I mean, I knew that they loved Jerome, and so I knew that their thing about being anti-gay was very kind of general, but the specific aspect of it, they really liked Jerome. And so when my father said, and we really like Jerome, and he goes, we just don't want gay people in the house. He said, I said, well, you don't want. And then I outed every single one of my friends that they had invited to the house. I said, you don't want Sabri, you don't want Richard, you don't want Chris, you don't want, and I just made this whole long list. I said, you don't want any of them back in the house. And I think they knew that it was ridiculous to say that. They didn't want them in the house because they really like these people. But yeah, the letter was hard to write, but it's actually easier to write a letter in some ways than to talk to someone in person. You know it's going to go, and then you kind of wait for the bombshell to happen. You wait for the response. So it was interesting. It wasn't an email. It wasn't like quick. It was a couple of weeks had passed. So
really considered. Do you think they've still got it?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I should ask them. God bless them. They're in their late 80s, still kicking. They're doing great. So yeah.
Probably got it framed somewhere.
Yeah, I know. I think they probably ripped it up and burned it. But they're interesting. If a gay bashing occurred in New York, my dad called me, making sure I was okay, of course, but also just to say, express his revulsion towards that and his just how the horror that they felt about that. They're really incredibly supportive. It's amazing. People can evolve, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the story I've heard a lot through doing this podcast, which is great.
Yeah, you're stuck with your family and vice versa in a sense. I mean, obviously, I had a great story compared to kids who got kicked out and beat up, who committed suicide, and who aren't here to tell their stories. And that's why we're telling our stories now, right? So kids don't continue to do that. And that probably will always happen. But, you're stuck with your family in a way. So years will go by, and at a certain point, hopefully, something will crack, and they'll just be like, oh, for God's sake, let's just, it's not that big of a deal. Let's get the dialogue going here.
But as you said, it is difficult for a lot of people. So if there's anyone listening, would you have any advice or words of wisdom from you as a out and proud gay 50-year-old man?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't presume everyone has their own path to walk, right? But I think when I was really young, maybe I wish I had talked to more people about it, just to confide in someone. I mean, I went from age 5 to 18 without saying ever, I think I'm gay to anyone. That's like 13 years, 14 years, whatever it was. That's a long time for a young person to keep something inside of them. That'll affect you for the rest of your life. So if you can find anybody supportive, I mean, everyone, as far as I can tell in my family, there are no other gay people. It's bizarre. I have got dozens and dozens of cousins, and, as far as I can see, there's no gay people in my family. But somewhere deep down, there's either a neighbor or a friend or some family member that's probably queer, right, that you can talk to. Find that ally.
Cheers to Ed for sharing a coffee and his story with us. And you can find out more about Ed and his travel magazine at manaboutworld.com. Please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to find out more about this podcast, perhaps ask us a question or even offer yourself up for an interview. Well, you can follow us at Come Out Stories on Twitter or Coming Out Stories Pod on Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Emma Goswell, and Coming Out Stories is a What Goes On media production. Next time round, you'll hear from writer, broadcaster and political commentator Ian Dale. Ian didn't come out till a bit later in life, but once he did, he told me there was no going back.
I did have feelings for them. And I knew what kind of girl I liked and what kind of girl I didn't like. So from that point of view, you could say, I suppose, yes, I was bisexual, sort of. But once I discovered cock, I'm afraid there was no going back.